What's up, you guys? It is another Saturday, and I'm your host, Mr. Amari Abasi, better known as OA Fagazine himself. Well, obviously, we were absent last week, but you know how I roll by now. This is just how I do it. I'm sorry. Like, I would love to tell you that I come here every single week, but what happens is I get busy with stuff, and Portland has me so booked. I'm Kelly Price, and I'm booked. So welcome to the show. So if you haven't already come to the show, this is a show absolutely about nothing. It's a podcast wherein I talk about having hosts, and I never have them, and I talk about having, like I said, special guests, rather, not host. I usually have and I don't. I end up being like, I'm just going to do this by myself today. So, if you've heard about my show, this is great, because that means it's spreading, because you can hear this show on, I don't know how you're listening right now, so there's that. So I don't know how you found us, but in case you found us on something like Spreaker or something, you can find us on iTunes, you can find us on Stitcher Radio, and tune in. And I think there's a few other options out there that I kind of did a Google search and found that my podcast could be heard other places. Oh, it could be heard on YouTube. So I think it's divided up into like 4 different, segments, because I didn't register. I didn't register my phone, and I'm not doing that. I just don't have that kind of time. I'm not doing it. I don't want them to know my shit. That's my business. So anyway, welcome, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. So summer is almost over. Fall leaves are everywhere. I cannot believe how fast this summer went. It's just gone. It's like, damn, crazy. I just can't. I just can't. So, but it has been a great summer here. It has been entirely too hot. It has been entirely too warm. I have eaten entirely too much, and I don't regret a damn thing. I just don't. Yeah. So today I had the opportunity, to actually go to the Shanghai tunnels here in Portland. Now, the interesting thing is I didn't know anything about this life. Knew nothing about it. It's like Portland is just one of those Russian dolls, those nesting dolls, where you just pull one right out from one and the other, and you just keep pulling them out and finding little treasures and hidden gems. This place is crazy. So I started a new job, and it's in no comparison to my other job. Like, I miss my other job so badly. I miss it because the people were great. It was great. And this job is just a job. It's one of those ones I'll just go. There's no frills, no thrills. I don't like it. I'll be honest, I don't. But it's like, I've never liked my job. I've only liked one job in my entire life, and that was the one that I left. But anyway, I have a coworker who's very colorful. She was telling me a story about how we started off the story by talking about the French catacombs, which are amazing and scary. Like, that's scary. Like, I went to that when I was probably like 22 or 23, and that was horrible. That was just a horrible, scary, and haunting experience. And I also talked about, as a kid, I went to the Queen Mary in Long Beach, and I had I didn't have an encounter. Like, I just saw something, and my mom was funny. I was like, "Mom, did you see that?" She's like, "Mm-mm." It was like, wait a minute. I don't know if I believe that. So I was like, well, you didn't say that? Mm-mm. So that kind of just confirmed that we both saw something that was unexplainable down in the pool area, and I do remember us leaving that area pretty quickly. Now, was it a ghost? I don't know. I just don't know. Like the jury's still out on that. Like I want to say there is such a thing, but then I'm skeptical, you know. So she tells us about this, we're talking about the French catacombs, and then she brings up, well, there's a Shanghai tunnels here in Portland. I'm like, I have no idea what that is. I don't understand. Like, you're gonna have to speak to me in English, because I have no, please. So she begins to tell me about how there's this underground life that existed here in Portland, wherein the Chinese were hired, basically slaves, to build an underground, underground transportation and underground, I guess you would call it to push goods around so you don't have to deal with the trades and all that. So they built this city underground so they wouldn't have to deal with above ground traffic and people, horses, and all that stuff. And so they built this huge underground system here. And of course, as life does with everything, it became super corrupt. So basically, pirates would come to town and need people to man the ships. So what they would do is basically drug them with opium and have trap doors and dump them in the underground and sell them to, the ships. Now, these people made no money on the ships. They were literally slaves, and they weren't black. They were white folks. So, like, white people enslaved other white people. And so they stuck them on these ships for like 3 years minimum, and it was illegal for you to leave the ship. You would go to jail, because once you were signed to be on this particular ship, that was your job. Whether you got paid or you didn't get paid, that wasn't the law's fault. It was like, that's on you, because you signed the contract. Well, what happened is they would forge these people's names on these contracts, and they sell them, and they would drug them and like I said, dump them underground. So you could take this tour and see the underground. Now, I have to say I was less than enthused with what they call the underground, because when I think of underground and tunnels, I think of, straight up like tunnel, and like at the catacombs, but this was nothing like that. It was just like, it's basically basements. Just think of a whole underground basement central networking thing. And so it wasn't scary, it was just interesting. And I think the backdrop was way more interesting than the tunnels themselves. So, they had real opium dens there, and I never really knew what that was. Like, I used to go to a club called the Opium Den back, I guess, in early 2000s, and it was amazing, and it was just great, and the music was great, and I just would dance there. So I didn't care about the name. I didn't know what it was. But so I got my little Opium Den lesson here today, and it turns out there were tons here. So the Chinese brought opium to the States, and basically they had like this whole network with cops, with bar owners, and they would basically take anybody who they thought would be a good worker, a good strong worker, and they would drug them, drop them in the ground, store them until someone needed them, and then they would take them on the ship and then be off, leave, And so you see this, and you see these trap doors, and you're just like, oh, this is crazy. It's crazy. So the part that struck me most, there were a couple things, being a total gay person, but it turns out that they built these bars that had troughs in them, in the front of them, basically, so the gentleman didn't have to leave the bar to pee. So they would just pee right there. They didn't want them to accidentally lose a potential, slave. So they would keep them at the bar and keep feeding them drinks and opium and dropping opium in their drinks. And as soon as they got to the point where they, were completely, intoxicated or whatever, drugged up, then they would lead them to the trap door and drop them completely out of sight. And it was just crazy to be able to see, the actual trap doors, to see, and to be led into the underground through the street, like in a main street. They just opened up the hatch, if you will, and you just walk into it. So it turns out they started to close them in the 40s. They realized that was just something that needed to be closed because homeless people started living in there, and they just knew that it was going to become a hazard to the, to the city. Not that it wasn't already, but it just infatuated me. And I guess I was enchanted by it because they basically took a lot of the transients and the homeless people and took them in because they knew they wouldn't be missed. And the reason why that resonated with me so much is because that's what's like here in Portland now. There's like this huge transient population that I think just kind of goes unmissed. So anybody could do whatever they wanted with them because no one would miss them. So it's sort of inherited. Like, you have all these transients in Portland, but that is historically the way it's been. It's always been that way here. And I had no idea. And I think the part that really, really got me was the stories about the human trafficking that go well beyond just the transients, about the women. And they would basically have these bunk beds, and these women would be down there. That's where they would sleep. And if they had kids, they would keep the kids down there in the underground until they were old enough to be sold. And they would sell them into either more slavery, or they would just sell them to someone who would, keep it or adopt it or whatever. Or, like I said, they would just put it back into slavery. So the mom, once the child was sold, the mom would be back into the brothel that was part of the bar system, the bar network, and the Shanghai underground. So the part that really got me too was that they would take the men's boots away for them so they wouldn't be able to get out or run or be able to get away from being locked up in the underground. And so when you go down there, you see all these old boots, like they're just old and dusty, and they actually have the boots still there. And that was just deep. Like, I was like, wow, can you imagine that life? Like, you're thinking that you're going to just be a part of, society. You're barely making it anyway. And then all of a sudden you're drugged and sold to a ship, to a pirate ship, basically. And that was your life for 3 years minimum. And sometimes they didn't even drop you off at your origin. Sometimes when they would take you to China and then bring you back, and then once wherever the cargo was, like if it decided to go to San Francisco, then that's where you got out, and you had no money. So you were right back into the situation that you were taken from, but in a whole different place. So if you had friends, family, or whatever, you're done. You don't know those people, and you can't travel. You can't just hop on a Greyhound and go see them, because you have no money, and there was no Greyhound, and it took months to travel like 10 miles. So I was like, wow, what a horrible history Portland has, And it turns out that the northwest part of Portland was the poorest. And now it's the richest. It's not the richest, but it's the Pearl District is over there, and it's probably one of the most elite areas in the system. But how they were, and this was really crazy because they didn't really care what color you were. It was your class. But the funny thing is, certain people